I pressed the pen to paper, my hand steady as stone. Ms. Chen, are you certain you don't want to review this with your attorney? Richard's lawyer asked, his eyes narrowed with suspicion behind expensive frames. This is a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement. Once you sign, you forfeit your right to speak about anything related to the Montgomery family, the company, or your marriage to Marcus Montgomery. I understand, I said softly and signed my name in one smooth motion. The lawyer blinked. Marcus, my soon-to-be ex-husband, leaned back in his leather chair with a smirk that I remembered so well from my first life. The same smirk he'd worn when I'd begged him not to let his mother have me committed. The same one from when I'd discovered he'd been funneling my family's company assets into his offshore accounts. The same one from the night before I died. Broken and alone in a psychiatric facility, after signing an NDA that ensured no one would ever know the truth. Well, Marcus said, exchanging a glance with his mother, Vivian Montgomery, who sat like a queen at the head of the conference table. That was easier than expected. Vivian's crimson lips curved into a razor smile. I told you she'd be reasonable. She knows what's good for her. They had no idea that in exactly 47 minutes, their entire world would detonate. My phone buzzed in my purse. I didn't need to check it. That would be my lawyer, Harrison Chen. No relation, though I'd chosen him specifically because sharing a surname with me would make them underestimate the connection. The text would say exactly 3 words: lawsuit has dropped. You see, I died 3 months ago. At least that's when my first life ended, November 14th, 2023, at 11:47 p.m. from an overdose of medications I didn't take myself. The orderlies at the Riverside Psychiatric Facility had been well paid by the Montgomery family to ensure I never left that room. The NDA I'd signed in that timeline had guaranteed that even if I had survived, no one would have believed my accusations of financial fraud, domestic abuse, and conspiracy. But then I'd opened my eyes in my childhood bedroom, 6 years earlier, the morning after I'd accepted Marcus Montgomery's proposal. The diamond ring had still been on my finger, glittering like a noose. This time, I knew everything. I knew that Marcus had only pursued me because my father's tech company, Chen Innovations, had developed proprietary AI software worth billions. I knew that his mother, Vivian, had orchestrated the entire courtship, seeing me as a naive 24-year-old who could be easily manipulated into signing over control. I knew that within a year of marriage, they would isolate me from my family, gaslight me into questioning my sanity, and systematically drain every asset my father had built over 30 years. I knew that my father would die of a heart attack 18 months after my wedding, the stress of watching his company crumble too much, for his weakened heart. I knew my younger brother David would turn to alcohol, unable to cope with the loss. I knew that I would spend 2 years trapped in a gilded cage, and then another year in hell itself before they finally decided I was too much of a liability to let live. In my first life, I'd been powerless because I'd signed that NDA without understanding what it truly meant. They'd offered me $5 million, a pittance compared to what they'd stolen, and told me it was my only option unless I wanted to be painted as a mentally unstable woman who'd squandered her inheritance and was now making false accusations against her respected husband and his philanthropic family. I'd signed it because I'd been broken, because 27 months of abuse had hollowed me out. This time, I'd spent 6 years preparing. The funds will be transferred to your account within 24 hours, the lawyer said, sliding the executed NDA into his briefcase. The Montgomery family appreciates your discretion during this difficult time. Difficult time. As if I were the problem. As if Marcus hadn't been caught with his mistress, another thing I'd known about in advance. Or as if the prenuptial agreement I'd been coerced into signing didn't entitle me to literally nothing despite 5 years of marriage. Thank you, I said, standing up. I smoothed down my simple black dress, not designer, not expensive. I'd learned to hide my weapons. I hope we can all move forward from this. Marcus actually laughed. Trust me, Vivian and I will have no trouble moving forward. He still called his mother by her first name. That should have been my first red flag, back in the original timeline. A 32-year-old man who couldn't call his mother Mom without her permission. Vivian stood, extending her hand to me with the air of someone granting an audience. It's truly for the best, dear. You were never cut out for our world. I'm sure you'll find somewhere more appropriate to land. I shook her hand, feeling the cold steel of her rings. In my first life, she'd used those same hands to sign commitment papers for my institutionalization. I'm sure I will, I said. The moment I stepped outside the Montgomery family's downtown law office, I finally allowed myself to check my phone. Harrison Chen. Lawsuit filed, all documents submitted. Montgomery Corp., Vivian Montgomery, Marcus Montgomery, and Montgomery Holdings all named. Press release goes live in 30 minutes. Are you clear? Me, clear. Execute phase 2. Harrison Chen. With pleasure. I got into my car, a modest Honda, not the Mercedes Marcus had gifted me and tracked, and drove exactly 3 blocks before pulling into a parking garage. Then I switched cars, sliding into the BMW registered under one of my shell companies, and drove to the office building I'd purchased 2 years ago, using funds carefully hidden from the Montgomery family's forensic accountants. The money hadn't come from my family. I'd learned that lesson. The moment the Montgomerys suspected I had access to Chen family assets, they'd file injunctions and freeze everything. Instead, I'd spent 6 years becoming a ghost investor. I'd used my knowledge of the future, stock tips, crypto surges, real estate bubbles, to build a fortune of $47 million, all hidden behind layers of LLCs and offshore trusts that even the best forensic accountant would need months to untangle. I'd hired Harrison Chen a year ago, feeding him every piece of evidence I'd need to bury the Montgomery family, and I'd done it so carefully that they'd never suspected a thing. Because I'd played my role perfectly. The devoted wife, the naive heiress, the woman so in love she couldn't see she was being used. I rode the elevator to the 15th floor where my legal team waited. "Mrs. Montgomery," Harrison said, standing as I entered. He was 53, silver-haired, and had a reputation as one of the most vicious litigators on the East Coast. "Congratulations on your signing." "Mr. Chen," I replied, "do we have confirmation?" He turned his laptop toward me. On the screen was a live feed of a press conference. My press conference. A woman I'd hired, a crisis PR specialist, stood at a podium, cameras flashing. Behind her was a screen displaying a single image, my face, bruised and bloodied from a fall down the stairs that Marcus had caused in my first life. I'd recreated it 2 months ago using a makeup artist and a photographer because I'd needed evidence they couldn't claim was old or fabricated. "Good afternoon," the PR specialist said. "I'm reading a statement on behalf of Aria Chen, who was until today married to Marcus Montgomery of Montgomery Corporation. Mrs. Chen has filed a lawsuit against Montgomery Corporation, its CEO, Vivian Montgomery, and her former husband, Marcus Montgomery, for fraud, embezzlement, domestic abuse, and conspiracy to commit financial crimes spanning 6 years." The reporters erupted in questions. The lawsuit details a pattern of systematic asset theft from Chen Innovations, the technology company founded by Aria Chen's late father, David Chen Sr. Evidence includes fraudulent transfer documents, forged signatures, and electronic communications between Marcus Montgomery and his mother Vivian, coordinating the theft of proprietary AI technology valued at over $3.2 billion. Harrison turned to me, his expression carefully neutral. "Your phone is about to explode." He was right. Within seconds, my phone lit up like a Christmas tree. Marcus, Vivian, Richard the lawyer, Marcus's sister Catherine, their publicist, their crisis manager, everyone in their orbit, suddenly realizing that the quiet, compliant woman who'd just signed an NDA was burning their empire to the ground. I silenced it. "The NDA," I said. "Walk me through it again." Harrison smiled, and it was a shark smile. "The NDA you signed prevents you from disclosing information about your marriage, the family, or the company. However, the lawsuit was filed 3 hours before you signed it, based on evidence gathered over the past 18 months. The NDA has no retroactive power over legal proceedings already in motion." "And the evidence?" "Bank records showing transfers from Chen Innovations accounts to Montgomery Holdings. Emails between Marcus and Vivian discussing how to handle you after they'd secured the AI patents. Text messages detailing their plan to have you declared mentally incompetent. And," he paused for effect, "recordings." The recordings. That had been the hardest part. In this timeline, I'd worn a wire for 8 months, documenting every threat, every admission, every moment of their cruelty. I'd captured Marcus admitting to his mistress that he'd never loved me, that I was just a means to an end. I'd captured Vivian explaining to her country club friends how she'd manipulated the Chen family into the merger that destroyed them. I'd captured Catherine, sweet, quiet Catherine, laughing about how easy it had been to forge my signature on transfer documents. All of it legal, all of it admissible, all of it gathered before I signed a single piece of paper restricting my speech. The NDA also, Harrison continued, only prevents disclosure related to the divorce settlement. It says nothing about corporate fraud or criminal conspiracy. Their lawyers wrote it too narrowly. They were so focused on silencing you about the marriage that they left a highway-sized gap for everything else. I sat down, the weight of 6 years of planning finally settling on my shoulders. They're going to claim I'm lying, I said. They're going to say I'm mentally unstable. They already tried that angle in your psychiatric records from... He paused, glancing at his notes with a slight frown. He didn't know about the rebirth. No one did. In this timeline, I'd never been institutionalized because I'd never given them the chance. But I'd manufactured evidence suggesting they'd tried. A consultation request to Riverside Psychiatric Facility that I'd intercepted and documented. Emails between Vivian and a doctor discussing options for handling an unstable daughter-in-law. They tried, I finished. But it won't work, not with the evidence we have. Harrison nodded. The SEC is already opening an investigation based on the documents we provided. The FBI's White-Collar Crimes Division has assigned a task force. And the media, he gestured to the screen, where social media was exploding with hashtags Montgomery fraud, justice for Aria, take down the Montgomerys. The narrative was already set. I wasn't a bitter ex-wife. I was a whistleblower, a survivor, a woman who'd lost her father and her family's legacy to corporate predators. My phone rang again. This time, I answered. You bitch! Marcus's voice was raw with rage. You signed the NDA. You can't... I signed an NDA about our divorce, I said calmly. I said nothing about your fraud, Marcus, or your mother's embezzlement, or the fact that you've been siphoning money from Montgomery Corporation itself. Did you really think I wouldn't find those accounts in the Caymans? Silence, then a say, you can't prove anything. I can prove everything. Bank records, emails, recordings. Your own words, Marcus. She'll never figure it out. She's too stupid, too in love. That's what you told Bethany, isn't it? Your mistress? The one you've been buying a condo for with my family's money? Bethany has nothing to do with... Bethany is named in the lawsuit. So is her LLC, the one you used to launder funds. So is your accountant, Peter Morrison. So is your mother's personal attorney, Richard Wallace. Yes, the one who just watched me sign the NDA. I could hear his breathing, sharp and panicked. We'll bury you in legal fees, he said finally. You don't have the resources to fight us. I laughed, and it felt good. It felt like power. Marcus, I've been hiding $47 million from you for 6 years. I own 4 companies you don't know about. I have investments that could fund this lawsuit for the next decade. And unlike you, my money isn't about to be frozen by federal investigators. The line went dead. Harrison was watching me with something like admiration. You really did plan for everything. Not everything, I said. I didn't plan for how good this would feel. The next 72 hours were chaos. Montgomery Corporation's stock plummeted 43%. As investors fled, the board of directors called an emergency meeting and suspended Vivian pending investigation. Marcus was fired from his vice president position, a symbolic role he'd held only because of his mother, and 3 of the company's major clients terminated their contracts. The FBI raided Montgomery Holdings, Montgomery Corporation's headquarters, and Marcus's penthouse apartment. They seized servers, documents, and hard drives. They arrested Peter Morrison, the accountant, who immediately cut a deal and confirmed everything in my lawsuit. The media couldn't get enough. Every news outlet from CNN to TMZ ran stories. Tech heiress exposes billion-dollar fraud. Montgomery empire crumbles amid abuse allegations. The NDA that couldn't stop justice. I didn't give interviews. I didn't need to. The evidence spoke for itself, but I did watch from my new apartment, a penthouse I'd purchased under an alias 6 months ago, as everything I'd scripted came to pass. Vivian tried to hold a press conference claiming I was a vindictive ex-wife spreading lies. It backfired spectacularly when a reporter asked about the emails where she'd discussed having me committed, and she'd responded, "That was a private family matter." The admission that she had, in fact, tried to have me institutionalized went viral within minutes. Marcus tried to paint himself as a victim of a gold digger, despite the fact that I'd brought $800 million in assets into the marriage and was leaving with nothing but a $5 million NDA payout, which I immediately donated to a domestic violence charity with a very public press release. Catherine, his sister, tried to stay quiet, but her name was all over the forged documents. She was arrested on a Tuesday morning in front of her children's private school. The video of her being led away in handcuffs became a meme. And me? I focused on phase 3. Chen Innovations is insolvent, my brother David said, his voice hollow on the other end of the phone. The patents are gone. The contracts are gone. Everything Dad built. I know, I said gently. But it's not gone. Not really. Arya, they stole everything. Even with your lawsuit, even if you win, the company is you. David, I need you to trust me. Can you do that? A long pause. In my first life, David had been lost to alcohol by this point, unable to cope with our father's death and the company's collapse. But in this timeline, I'd intervened earlier. I'd gotten him into therapy. I'd been the sister he needed instead of being too broken to help. I trust you, he said finally. Good. Check your email. I'm sending you documents. You're going to file them with the board tomorrow. What documents? Proof that I've been secretly acquiring Chen Innovations stock for the past 4 years. As of this morning, I own 67% of the company. I'm calling a shareholder meeting and I'm installing you as CEO. Silence. Arya? How? The same way I built 47 million, very carefully. The Montgomerys thought they'd destroyed Chen Innovations, but all they did was drive the stock price down. I bought every share I could find through shell companies they couldn't trace to me. I've been waiting for this moment. But the patents were transferred illegally. The lawsuit includes a provision demanding their return. With Peter Morrison's testimony and the email evidence, it's a guaranteed win. And once we have the patents back, Chen Innovations will be valued at over $2 billion. I've already secured funding from 3 venture capital firms who are very interested in AI technology. I could hear him crying softly. Dad would be so proud of you. I closed my eyes, thinking of my father in my first life, the man who died believing he'd failed, never knowing his daughter would eventually avenge him. I'm doing this for him, I said. And for us. The Montgomerys took everything once. They'll never get the chance again. The trial took 8 months. 8 months of depositions, discovery, motions, and countermotions. 8 months of the Montgomery legal team throwing everything they had at me, trying to discredit the evidence, trying to paint me as a liar and a manipulator. But every attack failed. The bank records were irrefutable. The emails were authenticated by digital forensic experts. The recordings were clear and damning. And Peter Morrison's testimony, backed by his own documents, confirmed every single allegation. Marcus tried to claim I'd seduced him into the marriage, that I'd been the one manipulating him. His lawyer presented this theory during a deposition, and Harrison had destroyed it in under 5 minutes. Mr. Montgomery, you pursued Ms. Chen for 6 months before proposing, correct? Yes, but you sent her 147 emails, according to records. You called her 89 times. You showed up at her office unannounced on 12 separate occasions. I was in love. Were you in love, or were you following your mother's instructions? Because we have emails from Vivian Montgomery to you, dated 3 weeks before you first contacted Arya Chen, with the subject line Chen Innovations Acquisition Strategy, and the text, Marcus, the daughter is the weak point. She's young, naive, and trusts easily. Make her fall in love with you. The deposition video was leaked. probably by someone on Harrison's team, and went viral. Marcus became a national symbol of corporate sociopathy overnight. Vivian tried to claim she'd been protecting the company, that the acquisition of Chen Innovations had been a legitimate business strategy. But that fell apart when the forensic accountants revealed that she'd personally pocketed $340 million of the stolen assets, far more than could be justified as executive compensation. The criminal charges came in month 5: wire fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, embezzlement, and, thanks to the evidence of their attempt to have me institutionalized, conspiracy to deprive civil rights. The Montgomerys pleaded not guilty. They thought their money and connections would save them. They were wrong. The verdict came on a Wednesday afternoon in June. I sat in the courtroom flanked by Harrison and David and watched as the jury foreman stood. In the matter of Arya Chen versus Montgomery Corporation, we find in favor of the plaintiff. Damages awarded: $3.2 billion for stolen intellectual property, $450 million in punitive damages, and $50 million for emotional distress. The room erupted. Reporters scrambled for their phones. Vivian's face went white. Marcus looked like he might vomit. In the matter of Arya Chen versus Vivian Montgomery. More verdicts, all in my favor. By the time the foreman finished reading, the total judgment was $4.7 billion. But the money wasn't even the best part. The best part came 2 hours later, when the criminal trial jury returned with their verdict. Guilty on all counts for Vivian, Marcus, and Catherine Montgomery. Vivian was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. Marcus got 12 years. Catherine got 8 years with credit for cooperation. Peter Morrison got 3 years and forfeiture of all assets. Richard Wallace, the lawyer, lost his license to practice law and faced his own criminal charges for conspiracy. And Montgomery Corporation? Dismantled, sold off in pieces. Every asset liquidated to pay the judgments and fines. The Montgomery name, once synonymous with wealth and power, became a cautionary tale. I stood on the balcony of my penthouse, watching the sunset over the city. In my hand was a glass of champagne. Domaine de la Romanée Conti, the same brand Vivian had served at her country club luncheons where she'd mocked my family. My phone buzzed. A news alert: Vivian Montgomery reports to federal prison today. I didn't smile. This wasn't about joy. It was about justice. Below me, the city lights began to flicker on, thousands of them, each one representing a life, a story, a person with their own struggles. For years, in this life and the last, I'd felt powerless, crushed under the weight of people who'd seen me as nothing more than a means to their ends. But I'd learned something important. Power isn't about being the strongest or the loudest or the cruelest. Power is about being underestimated by the right people at the right time. The Montgomerys had thought signing that NDA meant victory. They'd thought I was defeated, silenced, bought off for $5 million and a quiet exit. They'd never suspected that the moment I touched pen to paper, they were already finished. Because in that conference room, while they'd been congratulating themselves on how easily I'd folded, my lawsuit was already filed. The evidence was already submitted. The FBI was already building their case. The press was already preparing their headlines. The NDA didn't protect them. It protected me. It proved I'd tried to take the settlement, that I'd been reasonable, that I'd done everything right. And when they inevitably violated it themselves by trying to discredit me publicly, it gave me grounds for additional damages. They'd written their own ending the moment they'd underestimated me. My phone rang. Harrison. "Congratulations, Ms. Chen," he said. "The first payment just hit your account. $500 million. The judgments would take years to collect fully, but I had time. And with Chen Innovations back under family control and valued at $2.3 billion, I didn't need the Montgomery money to survive. I needed it to rebuild. Thank you, Harrison, for everything. I should be thanking you. This case will define my career." He paused. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "How did you know? How did you predict every move they'd make? It was like you'd lived through it before." I smiled, looking out at the city where I'd died alone in my first life. and where I'd been reborn into a second chance. Let's just say I'm a very good student of human nature, I said. The Montgomerys were always going to underestimate me. They were always going to be greedy. They were always going to think they were smarter than everyone else. All I had to do was give them enough rope and wait for them to hang themselves. Well, you did more than that. You built a financial empire, gathered evidence that would make the FBI jealous, and executed a legal strategy that law schools will teach for decades. That's not just observation, that's genius. Or, I said softly, it's revenge. We said our goodbyes, and I stood alone on the balcony as night fell completely. In my first life, this night, the night of their conviction, would have been impossible to imagine. I'd been dead for years by this point, my story forgotten, my family's legacy destroyed. But now Chen Innovations was thriving under David's leadership. The AI software my father had developed was being used in hospitals to detect cancer early, in schools to personalize education, in disaster relief to coordinate resources. His dream hadn't died, I'd resurrected it. Now the Montgomery family was facing the consequences of their cruelty. Vivian would spend her golden years in a federal facility. Marcus would lose the prime years of his life to prison. Catherine would emerge a convicted felon with no family fortune to cushion her fall, and me, I'd bought back my family home, the one the Montgomerys had forced us to sell. I'd established a foundation in my father's name to support young entrepreneurs. I'd donated $100 million to domestic violence organizations. I'd turned my pain into purpose. But most importantly, I'd learned that revenge isn't about becoming like your enemies. It's about being so much smarter than them that they never see it coming. The Montgomerys had spent years building their trap for me, not realizing I'd been building a bigger one for them. They'd thought the NDA was the end. It was just the beginning. 6 months later, I sat in a television studio preparing for my first interview. I'd avoided the press throughout the trial, but now that the convictions were final and the appeals were failing, I'd decided it was time to tell my story. The interviewer, a sharp woman named Sarah Chen, no relation, settled into her chair across from me. Ms. Chen, thank you for agreeing to speak with us. This is your first public interview since the verdict. Why now? Because I want other people in situations like mine to know that they're not powerless, I said. The Montgomerys tried to silence me. They tried to paint me as crazy, as vindictive, as a liar. But the truth doesn't need to be loud, it just needs to be documented and tested. You signed an NDA just hours before your lawsuit became public. Some have suggested this was a calculated move to make yourself appear cooperative while already having filed the legal action. Is that true? I smiled. The NDA was about the divorce. The lawsuit was about fraud. They're separate matters. But the timing was perfect, I agreed. I knew they'd offer me an NDA. I knew they'd want to silence me about the marriage, about the abuse, about everything they'd done. And I knew that if I refused to sign it, they'd paint me as difficult, as someone who couldn't move on. So I signed it. And then the lawsuit they'd never anticipated buried them. You've been described as one of the most strategic minds in modern litigation. Some are calling this the Chen strategy, using compliance as a weapon. What do you say to that? I say that women, especially women in abusive situations, are taught to be compliant, to not make waves, to take what's offered and be grateful. The Montgomerys counted on that. They thought signing the NDA meant I'd accepted defeat. I leaned forward. But compliance and defeat aren't the same thing. Sometimes the most powerful move is to give people exactly what they think they want and let them destroy themselves with their own arrogance. Your lawyer, Harrison Chen, has said this is the most complex fraud case he's ever worked. You spent 6 years gathering evidence while still married to Marcus Montgomery. That must have been incredibly difficult. It was survival, I said simply. Every day I stayed in that marriage was a day I was documenting their crimes. Every family dinner was a chance to record Vivian's admissions. Every fight with Marcus was evidence of the abuse. I turned their home into a crime scene, and they never even noticed. And the financial aspect? You've admitted to hiding $47 million in assets while married. Some have criticized this as being as deceptive as the Montgomerys' actions. The difference, I said, my voice hardening, is that I earned my money legally. I invested in stocks and real estate using publicly available information. I didn't steal from my spouse's family. I didn't forge signatures. I didn't embezzle from the company I was supposed to be leading. I protected myself financially because I knew that one day I'd need resources to fight them. And I was right. Sarah nodded. You've also taken back control of Chen Innovations. The company has tripled in value since you reclaimed it. What's next for you? Justice isn't just about punishing the guilty, I said. It's about restoration. My father built Chen Innovations to help people. The Montgomerys tried to turn it into another tool for their greed. Now it's back to its original purpose. We're developing AI for healthcare, education, climate science, things that matter. That's my father's legacy, and it's the best revenge I could ever have. Do you have any regrets? I thought about my first life. About dying alone, defeated, believing I'd failed everyone I loved. About waking up with a second chance and choosing to use it for more than just personal satisfaction. No, Assam, I said. I regret nothing. Not the planning, not the secrecy, not the years of playing a role, because it led to this. The Montgomerys are in prison. Chen Innovations is thriving. And thousands of people in abusive relationships have seen that you can fight back and win. One final question. If you could say anything to Vivian or Marcus Montgomery right now, what would it be? I looked directly into the camera, knowing they'd see this, knowing that in their prison cells they'd watch and remember. You thought I was weak, I said. You thought I'd sign that NDA and disappear. You thought you'd gotten away with it, but every signature has consequences, and while you were congratulating yourselves on how clever you'd been, my lawyer had already filed the lawsuit. You didn't silence me. You just gave me one more piece of evidence that you thought you were untouchable. Thank you for that. The interview aired on a Sunday night and became the most watched program of the year. Within days, I was receiving thousands of messages from people who'd been in similar situations. Trapped by NDAs, silenced by powerful families, told they were crazy for speaking up. I hired a team of lawyers to offer pro bono consultations. I funded a legal defense fund for victims of corporate and domestic abuse. I turned my experience into a blueprint for others. And slowly, I began to heal. The thing about revenge is that it's supposed to be empty. It's supposed to leave you feeling hollow once the target is destroyed. But this wasn't just revenge, it was reclamation. Every dollar I won back was a dollar that could fund research, help victims, build something good. Every year the Montgomerys spent in prison was a year someone else's abuser might think twice. I'd taken their weapon, the NDA, and turned it into their downfall. I'd taken their assumptions about me, weak, naive, easy to manipulate, and used them to build an empire they never saw coming. I'd taken their cruelty and transformed it into purpose. On the one-year anniversary of the verdict, I stood at my father's grave, David beside me. We did it, Dad, I whispered. Chen Innovations is worth $4 billion now. We're saving lives, making a difference, everything you dreamed. He'd be proud, David said, his hand on my shoulder. I'm proud. Arya, what you did, what we did, I corrected. You rebuilt the company, I just got it back. You did more than that. You showed me it was possible to fight back. After Dad died, I thought we'd lost everything. But you never gave up. I smiled, thinking of the moment I'd opened my eyes in my childhood bedroom, the weight of my first life's failures still heavy on my soul, and the choice I'd made. To do it all differently. I couldn't give up, I said. Too many people were counting on me, including the version of myself that didn't make it. David didn't understand, but that was okay. Some stories aren't meant to be fully shared. As we walked back to the car, my phone buzzed. A news alert. Montgomery appeals denied. Convictions stand. Vivian would serve her full 15 years. Marcus would serve his 12. And I would spend the rest of my life building something they could never take away. Because that's the thing about revenge. When you do it right, it's not about destruction. It's about transformation. They'd tried to erase me. Instead, I'd erase them. And I'd done it with a signature on a piece of paper they'd been so sure meant victory. The NDA they'd crafted so carefully to silence me had become the proof of their arrogance, the timestamp of their defeat, the monument to their downfall. They'd made me sign it without negotiating. They just didn't know my lawyer had already filed the lawsuit. That was their mistake. and my triumph. 2 years after the verdict, I received a letter from Vivian Montgomery. It arrived at my office, forwarded through the prison system, and I almost threw it away without reading. But curiosity got the better of me. Dear Arya, I suppose you think you've won. You've taken everything, my company, my freedom, my family's legacy. You've destroyed 3 lives for your revenge. But I want you to know something. I don't regret what we did. Marcus and I saw an opportunity and we took it. That's business. Your father was weak, sentimental. He never would have maximized Chen Innovations the way we could have. You may have beaten us in court, but you've become exactly what you hated. You're ruthless, you're calculating, you hid money, wore wires, manipulated everyone around you. You're just like me now. I hope that keeps you up at night. Vivian. I read it twice, then set it down on my desk. She was wrong, of course, but I understood why she thought that way. To Vivian, the only difference between us was that I'd won. She couldn't see what I saw, that I'd protected people instead of exploiting them, that I'd built instead of destroyed, that every manipulative move I'd made had been in service of justice, not greed. But that wasn't what made her wrong. What made her wrong was the assumption that becoming strategic meant becoming cruel, that fighting back meant adopting the enemy's values. I'd learned to be ruthless when necessary. Yes, I'd learned to hide my intentions and plan for every contingency. But I'd also learned to be kind to those who deserved it, to build up instead of tear down when possible, to use power not for its own sake, but for a purpose. Vivian had spent her life taking. I'd spent mine, both lives, learning to give. That was the difference she'd never understand. I picked up a pen and wrote a simple response. Vivian, you're right that I'm not the same person who married your son. That person was naive enough to trust you. This person knows better. I sleep just fine. Arya, I sent it off and never thought about her again. 5 years after the verdict, I attended the dedication ceremony for the David Chen Senior Institute for AI Ethics at MIT. The building was beautiful, glass and steel, with my father's name etched above the entrance. Inside, researchers were already at work on projects funded by my foundation. AI systems to detect financial fraud, ironic, I know. Machine learning tools to identify domestic abuse patterns in emergency room visits, algorithms to make legal representation accessible to people who couldn't afford traditional lawyers. David gave a speech about our father's vision. I stood to the side, watching students, brilliant young minds who would shape the future, file into the auditorium. One of them, a young woman who couldn't have been older than 22, approached me after the ceremony. Ms. Chen, I'm Maya. I wanted to thank you. Your foundation scholarship is the only reason I could afford grad school. What are you studying? I asked. Corporate law with a focus on white-collar crime. I want to be like you. She blushed. I mean, I want to help people the way you did. Use the law to protect people from powerful people who think they can get away with anything. I smiled, seeing echoes of my younger self in her earnest face. Then let me give you some advice, I said. Document everything. Trust your instincts. And never, ever sign something without understanding exactly what it means and what it doesn't mean. She nodded seriously, pulling out a notebook to write this down. One more thing, I added. The powerful stay powerful because people assume they can't be beaten. But everyone has weaknesses. Everyone makes mistakes. You just have to be patient enough to wait for them. Is that how you beat the Montgomerys? She asked. No, I said. That's how they beat themselves. I just gave them the opportunity. 10 years after the verdict, Marcus Montgomery was released from prison, having served his full sentence with no early release. He emerged into a world that had moved on, where the Montgomery name was a punchline, where his former friends had scattered, where his mother would spend 5 more years behind bars. He tried to rebuild, started a consulting company that immediately failed when clients learned who he was, attempted to write a memoir that no publisher would touch, went on podcasts claiming he'd been the real victim, which only resulted in public backlash. I watched from a distance, not with satisfaction, but with the quiet certainty that justice had been served. He'd lost everything because he'd valued nothing but power and wealth. He'd destroyed a family because he'd seen them as objects, not people. And now he'd spend the rest of his life as what he'd always been, insignificant. I, meanwhile, had built an empire of meaning. Chen Innovations was now worth $12 billion and employed over 10,000 people. The David Chen Senior Institute had graduated 200 students who were changing the field of AI ethics. My legal foundation had helped 3,000 victims of corporate and domestic abuse win their cases. And me, I was happy. Not because I'd destroyed the Montgomerys, though I won't lie, that hadn't hurt, but because I'd taken the second chance I'd been given and used it to become someone my father would be proud of. Someone I was proud of. On the 15th anniversary of the verdict, I did something I'd never done before. I visited Marcus. He was working as a night manager at a warehouse, living in a studio apartment, driving a 15-year-old car. His hair had gone gray. His face was lined with bitterness. We met at a coffee shop, neutral ground. He looked at me with barely concealed hatred. "Come to gloat?" he asked, Mum. "No," I said. I came to tell you something I should have said years ago." "What's that?" "I forgive you." He blinked, clearly not expecting this. "I forgive you for using me, for conspiring with your mother to destroy my family, for the abuse, the manipulation, all of it. I forgive you because carrying that anger was exhausting, and I don't need it anymore." "I don't want your forgiveness," he spat. "I know this isn't for you, it's for me." I stood to leave, then paused. "You know what the saddest part is? If you'd actually loved me, if you'd chosen to be a good person, we could have built something incredible together. Chen Innovations and Montgomery Corporation could have changed the world, but you chose greed, and that choice cost you everything." "You destroyed my life," he said. "No, Marcus, I held you accountable. You destroyed your own life the moment you decided I was worth less than money." I left him there, and I meant what I said. I forgave him. Not because he deserved it, but because I did. 20 years after the verdict, I stood in my office at Chen Innovations, now a sprawling campus that employed 30,000 people worldwide. Our AI systems were being used in 150 countries. We'd helped diagnose cancer in early stages for over 1 million patients. Our educational software had personalized learning for 50 million students. My father's dream had exceeded even his wildest imagination. David's children, my niece and nephew, were now working at the company, carrying the legacy into the next generation. And I'd just accepted a Presidential Medal of Freedom for contributions to technology and social justice. My phone rang. Harrison Chen, now retired but still a friend. "Did you see the news?" he asked. "Which news?" "Vivian Montgomery died in prison this morning. Heart attack." I absorbed this quietly. I felt nothing, not satisfaction, not sadness, just acknowledgement. "I see." "Marcus released a statement blaming you for her death. Says the stress of the conviction killed her." "Of course he did." "Are you going to respond?" "No, let him have his grief. It's the only thing he has left." We talked for a few more minutes, then hung up. I walked to my window, looking out at the campus my father had dreamed of, that I'd rebuilt, that would outlast all of us. Vivian Montgomery had spent her last years in a prison cell, removed from the luxury and power she'd valued above everything. That was consequence enough. Marcus Montgomery would spend the rest of his life bitter and small, watching from the sidelines as the family he'd tried to destroy thrived beyond measure. That was consequence enough. And I would spend my days building, creating, helping others avoid the pain I'd experienced in my first life. That was reward enough. 25 years after the verdict, I was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The doctors gave me 6 months, maybe a year with treatment. I declined the treatment. I'd lived 2 full lives already. I'd accomplished everything I'd set out to do and more. I'd seen justice served, my father's legacy restored, and my family thriving. I was ready. David cried when I told him. My niece and nephew pleaded with me to fight, but I'd fought enough for 3 lifetimes. In my final months, I put my affairs in order. I ensured Chen Innovations would continue under strong leadership. I finalized the endowments for my foundations. I wrote letters to the people who'd mattered, Harrison, my employees, the students who'd benefited from my scholarships. And I wrote one final letter to be published after my death. To anyone who's ever felt powerless, I spent the first version of my life being crushed by people who saw me as nothing more than a means to their wealth. I died alone, defeated, believing I'd failed everyone I loved. But I was given a second chance, and I used it to become everything they never expected. The Montgomerys thought they could silence me with an NDA. They thought they could take everything, and I'd just accept it. They were wrong. Not because I was stronger than them, or smarter than them, or more ruthless than them, but because I understood something they didn't. Real power isn't about control, it's about purpose. Every dollar I hid from them went to building something good. Every piece of evidence I gathered protected not just me, but everyone else they might have victimized. Every strategic move I made was in service of justice, not just revenge. If you're reading this and you feel trapped by an abuser, by an NDA, by people who seem too powerful to fight, remember, they're only powerful because you don't know their weaknesses yet. Document everything. Trust your instincts. Find allies who believe in you. And most importantly, never let them see you planning. The moment I signed that NDA, they thought they'd won. They didn't know my lawyer had already filed the lawsuit. They didn't know I'd spent 6 years preparing for that exact moment. Let them underestimate you. Let them think they've won. And then show them what real victory looks like. The best revenge is building something so beautiful, so meaningful, so enduring, that it makes their cruelty look like the petty, small thing it always was. I did that, and so can you, with love and solidarity, Arya Chen. I died on a Tuesday morning, with David holding my hand and my niece reading me updates about Chen Innovations' latest breakthrough in early cancer detection. The irony wasn't lost on me. My obituary made the front page of every major newspaper. Tech pioneer and justice advocate Arya Chen dies at 56. The woman who took down the Montgomery empire and built a better one. They called me a hero, a revolutionary, a symbol of resilience. But I was just someone who'd been given 2 chances at life and had decided the second time to do it right. At my funeral, they read my final letter. In the audience were hundreds of people I'd helped, scholarship recipients, legal foundation beneficiaries, domestic violence survivors who'd found their own justice. Marcus Montgomery showed up, in the back, looking old and bitter. I like to think in that moment, he finally understood. I hadn't destroyed him out of cruelty. I'd simply refused to let him destroy me. And in the end, that had made all the difference. In the weeks after my death, something unexpected happened. Thousands of people came forward with their own stories of using the Chen strategy, documenting abuse, gathering evidence quietly, playing the long game until they could strike with overwhelming force. NDAs that were supposed to protect powerful people from their crimes, instead, became the timestamps of those people's downfalls. Victims who were supposed to stay silent instead built cases so ironclad that no amount of money or influence could deflect them. The law began to change. Several states passed legislation limiting the use of NDAs in cases involving abuse or criminal activity. The Arya Chen law made it illegal to use NDAs to silence whistleblowers about corporate fraud, and Chen Innovations continued to thrive, with my niece as CEO, pushing the boundaries of what AI could do for humanity. My tombstone was simple. Arya Chen, 995-2051. She signed the NDA, the lawsuit had already been filed. Epilogue, the attorney's perspective, from Harrison Chen's memoir, The Cases That Changed Me, published 2055. People often ask me about the Arya Chen case. It's been over 30 years since we filed that initial lawsuit, and it remains the most complex, brilliant, and personally meaningful case of my career. But here's what most people don't understand. Arya Chen didn't hire me to help her get revenge. She hired me to help her get justice. And there's a crucial difference. Revenge is personal. It's about making someone suffer because that they made you suffer. It's a zero-sum game where everyone loses something. Justice is about restoration. It's about taking what was broken and making it right, not just for yourself, but for everyone who might be hurt the same way in the future. Arya spent 6 years gathering evidence. Most of my clients can't maintain focus for 6 weeks, let alone 6 years. She wore a wire to family dinners. She documented every financial transaction. She built a fortress of evidence so strong that the Montgomery legal team couldn't find a single crack to exploit. And she did it all while playing the role of the naive, devoted wife. I've never seen anything like it. The strategic thinking, the patience, the absolute refusal to give in to the very human desire for immediate confrontation. It was masterful. But what impressed me most wasn't the strategy. It was her purpose. Every dollar she won in the lawsuit went to building something good. Every public statement she made was designed to help other victims find their voice. Every move she made was calculated not just to punish the Montgomerys, but to prevent future Montgomerys from victimizing future Aryas. When she signed that NDA, the Montgomerys thought they'd checkmated her. They genuinely believed that a piece of paper and $5 million would make the problem go away. They didn't understand that they were playing checkers while Arya was playing three-dimensional chess. The lawsuit had been filed 3 hours before she walked into that conference room. The evidence had been submitted, the FBI had been notified, the press had been briefed. Every domino was already falling. They just couldn't hear it yet. That NDA didn't protect them. It became Exhibit A in demonstrating their consciousness of guilt. Why would the Montgomery family need to silence Arya Chen with an NDA if they hadn't done anything wrong? I asked the jury during opening arguments. They never recovered from that. In the years since, I've tried to replicate the Chen strategy with other clients. Some have succeeded. Many have failed because they lacked Arya's patience or her ability to see the bigger picture. But every single one of them was inspired by her example, that you don't have to accept defeat, that powerful people can be beaten, that the law, when wielded correctly, is the greatest equalizer we have. The last time I spoke to Arya, a few weeks before she died, she told me something I'll never forget. "Harrison," she said, "people think signing that NDA was about tricking them, but it wasn't. It was about showing them exactly what kind of person they were. They looked at a woman they'd abused, a woman they'd stolen from, a woman they'd tried to institutionalize, and they offered her $5 million to go away quietly. And they thought she'd take it because they couldn't imagine someone valuing justice more than money." "But you did take it," I pointed out. She smiled. "I took the money, but I'd already taken so much more. I took their freedom, their reputation, their empire, and their future. The $5 million was just a souvenir." That was Arya Chen, a woman who understood that sometimes the only way to beat people who have no honor is to let them think you have none either, right up until the moment you prove them devastatingly wrong. The Montgomery family thought they were dealing with a victim. They were dealing with a reckoning, and they never saw it coming. Final note. In 2053, Marcus Montgomery gave his first and only interview about the case to a true crime podcast. He was 84 years old and living in a retirement community on a modest pension. The interviewer asked him if he'd learned anything from his experience. "Yeah," Marcus said. "I learned that some people can't let things go. Arya spent 6 years of her life obsessing over me and my family. She won in court, sure, but she wasted her whole life on revenge. Meanwhile, I've made peace with what happened. I've moved on." The interview was widely mocked on social media. Because while Marcus had been moving on in his studio apartment with his night manager job, Arya had been building a multi-billion-dollar empire that changed the world. While he'd been making peace, she'd been helping thousands of people escape the kind of abuse he'd inflicted. While he'd been letting go, she'd been ensuring that the Chen name would be remembered for generations as a symbol of innovation and justice. Marcus Montgomery died in 2054, largely forgotten except as a cautionary tale. Chen Innovations is still thriving in 2055, celebrating its 75th anniversary with Arya's great-niece as CEO. The David Chen Senior Institute for AI Ethics has trained over 5,000 students who are now leaders in their fields. The Arya Chen Legal Defense Foundation has helped over 50,000 victims of corporate and domestic abuse win their cases. And the lesson endures. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's building something so magnificent that your enemy's cruelty becomes nothing more than a footnote in your triumph. Arya Chen signed the NDA, but the lawsuit had already been filed, and the world changed forever.